Hi, I'm Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy Segment Show. Also today in this segment, I'm at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana. The National New York Central Railroad Museum is located on 721 South Main Street in Elkhart, Indiana, and is open if you check the web for the hours. The museum was founded in 1987, and the museum is a preservation site of both local and national railroad heritage pertaining to the New York Central system. The New York Central was once the second largest railroad in the United States, with 11,000 route miles of track in 11 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Elkhart, Indiana is a natural home for the museum. The first railroad to arrive was the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad in 1833, and the New York Central gained control of the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad in 1914. Also, the museum is housed in an old freight house, and the freight house was built in 1907 by the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway. The museum is dedicated to the New York Central Railroad. However, the museum is also dedicated to collecting material of more general historic railroad interest. The New York Central's Robert R. Young Yard, which is now the Norfolk Southern Railway's Elkhart Yard and is the largest railroad freight classification yard east of the Mississippi River. The National New York Central Railroad Museum has exhibits in the old freight house, and also it has a Lionel O-scale model railroad as well. And also the museum grounds has pieces of railroad equipment on display, and most of them you'll find are mostly former New York Central equipment, and some from different railroads as well. Also, there is a miniature train you can ride and is only operated on select days throughout the week, and is a 2-foot gauge train known as the Nibco Express, and is likely used mostly in the summer as well. Also, the Amtrak passenger trains stop at the station daily, and the trains that make stops are the Capital Limited, which runs between Chicago and Washington, D.C., and the Lakeshore Limited, which travels between New York City or Boston, Massachusetts. And also the tracks, like I mentioned, were owned by the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railroad till the New York Central. Then the tracks were later owned by the Penn Central, which the New York Central and Pennsylvania Railroad merged to create that railroad in 1968. Then in 1974, Conrail took control of the Penn Central, and then Norfolk Southern bought portions of the Conrail system as well. And today, the tracks that go by the museum are owned by Norfolk Southern as well. What you see right behind me is the New York Central City of Elkhart. The New York Central City of Elkhart was built by the Budd Company in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1937 and is a parlor observation car. This car was originally built for the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad and was originally numbered 454 and was named Minnesota, and it was also used on the back of a streamlined passenger train on the railroad, as passengers would ride inside and even get a view from the window as well. Then later on, this car was retired and was acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, and was completely gutted and was repainted in a New York Central scheme and was renamed the City of Elkhart and is attached to the building as well. Also, you can even go inside the car and you'll also see there are tables around it as well. What you see right behind me is the New York Central St. Joseph River. The New York Central St. Joseph River was built by the Standard Steel Car Company in 1914 and is a passenger coach. This car never saw service on the New York Central Railroad. Also, the car that actually had that name is a sleeper car and is numbered 10189, and it was built by Pullman in 1949 and has 10 roomettes and 6 double bedrooms. It was later moved to Mexico for the Ferrocarriles Nacionales de Mexico, which is Spanish for National Railways of Mexico, and was renumbered 518 and was renamed Bermania. It may have been cut up for scrap later. About this car, it was originally used for the Illinois Central Railroad and was originally numbered 2694, and also this car was used as a daytime car for several years. It was built as a daytime car. In the 1940s, it was modernized to match the appearance of the new streamlined cars. Then later on, the coach was retired and was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, and is seen on display and holds the museum's archives. And it was also repainted in a New York Central paint scheme and was renamed Hudson River as well. Then at one point, after 2015 or 2016, it was later renamed St. Joseph River. Today, it can be found here on display where it is today, and you can also visit the inside and see that there are exhibits inside it as well. What you see right behind me is the New York Central St. Joseph River. The New York Central Elkhart River was built by Standard Steel Car Company in 1918 and is a passenger coach. This car was never built for the New York Central Railroad. Also, the car that actually had that name is a sleeper car and was numbered 10168. And it was built by Pullman in 1949 and had 10 roomettes and 6 double bedrooms. It was later moved to Mexico for the Ferrocarril del Pacifico, which is in Spanish for Railway of the Pacific, and was renumbered to 37 and was renamed Capricornus. It may have been cut up later. And about this car, it was originally built for the Illinois Central Railroad and was originally numbered 2234. It spent many years hauling passengers when it was used as a daytime coach, as passengers would ride aboard this car for many years. It likely saw service on the City of New Orleans passenger train. Later, it was renumbered 2907. It was then modernized later on. It was then renumbered 2808. Then it was renumbered 2691. It was then bought by the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad and was renumbered 196-691 and was likely put into maintenance of way service for that railroad. Then later on, the coach was retired and was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, and is seen on display and even functions as an exhibit car. And when it came to the museum, it was also repainted in a New York Central paint scheme and was named Elkhart River as well. What you see right behind me is New York Central 4085. New York Central 4085 was built by Electromotive Division in LaGrange, Illinois in 1953 and is the 185-43rd diesel locomotive built by that factory and is an E8A type diesel locomotive. This locomotive is one of 32 E8A units delivered to the New York Central Railroad, numbered from 4064 to 4095. This locomotive was an express passenger locomotive for the New York Central Railroad and hauled passenger trains on the New York Central Railroad, and it was the lead unit on the 20th Century Limited when the train departed Chicago, Illinois for New York City for the final time on December 3, 1967. Then when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad in 1968, it was then used by that railroad and kept the number. Then in 1976, the Penn Central merged to Conrail and the locomotive was renumbered 4328. Then that year it was acquired for commuter train service by the New Jersey Transit and it kept the number. Then later on it was used for the New Jersey Department of Transportation and again kept the number. Then later on it was retired and in 1987 it was acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it can be seen today. It was then repainted to its New York Central livery and given its original number. Today it is preserved here at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. And also you can even visit the locomotive's cab and even sit where the engineer used to sit and even blow the locomotive's horn as well.
And that's how it's done.
What you see right behind me is Penn Central 4882. Penn Central 4882 was built by the Pennsylvania Railroad Juniata Shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1939 and is the 4351st electric locomotive built by that factory and is a GG1 type electric locomotive. It is one of 139 GG1s built. Originally, the locomotive was built for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and this is the original number it carried. Also, it was used for hauling passenger trains for many years. Then, in 1968, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central merged to become the Penn Central, and the locomotive kept the number. Then, in 1974, the Penn Central merged to Conrail and the locomotive kept that number for that railroad company. Then, in 1976, it was sold to the New Jersey Transit and again kept the number. This was the last GG1 to ever be in operation as it is believed to be. Then, in 1983, it was retired and it was one of three of the last GG1s to be used in revenue service along with units 4877 and 4879, which are both located at the United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey in Boonton, New Jersey, and this one had the honor of being the last of its kind to be in operation when it pulled those two into the Matawan, New Jersey yard after a farewell to the GG1's day. Then in 1989, it was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it can be seen on display today. It was even painted in its Penn Central livery in 1998. Also, Penn Central 4882 is one of 16 surviving GG1s left in the world today, and this one can be found here at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. What you see right behind me is New York Central X28. New York Central X28 was built by Industrial Brownhoist in Bay City, Michigan in 1923 and is a 150-ton crane. This crane spent many years in maintenance of way service and also went out on work duty with a flat car between the crane and engine, and would even be used for lifting and lowering things as it would be used for maintenance of way service. It was also based in Harmon, New York. Then, in 1968, when the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroad both merged together to form the Penn Central, it was used by that railroad. Then, in 1974, when the Penn Central merged to Conrail, it was then used by that railroad and may have kept the number as well. Then it was retired, and later it was acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. What you see right behind me is Baltimore, Ohio 288-257. Baltimore and Ohio 288-257 was built in 1957 and is a two-door boxcar. This car was used on freight trains and also would carry cargo such as boxes, crates, barrels, and all sorts of cargo it may have carried in the past. Also, this car was used on freight trains with a line of boxcars many years ago when it was used on the railroad. Then, in 1973, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad became a subsidiary of the Chessie system, and this car was likely used by that railroad and would have kept this number for that company. Then the car was retired, and then it was acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it can be seen today. Also on the sides of the boxcar, it has the museum's logo of a New York Central style logo saying National New York Central Railroad Museum, and a picture of a white elk on a heart, hence the name of the town this car is located in as well. What you see right behind me is New York Central 18136. New York Central 18136 was built in 1949 and is a transfer caboose. This car was originally built as a box car and would carry cargo on board. Then, in 1967, it was then rebuilt by the New York Central Railroad Rochester shops in Rochester, New York, and it became a transfer caboose and gained this number. It would also be used for maintenance of way service on the railroads it served. Then the New York Central Railroad and Pennsylvania Railroad merged to form the Penn Central Railroad in 1968, and the car kept the number. Then in 1974 it was merged to Conrail, and the car again kept the number. Then later on the car was retired and was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. What you see right behind me is Indiana Harbor Belt 75. Indiana Harbor Belt 75 was built around the 1900s and is an all-steel caboose. This caboose originally served the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and the number it had when it was used for that railroad is unknown. and it was used as the train crew's office and was used on the back end of freight trains many years ago. Then it served the Indiana Harbor Belt line and was renumbered 75 and was repainted to its current color, and it was used on freight trains for the Indiana Harbor Belt Railroad as the train crew's office as well. Then this caboose was retired and was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. What you see right behind me is New York Central 3001. New York Central 3001 was built by Alco in Schenectady, New York in 1940 and is the 693-38 steam locomotive built by that factory and is a 482 Mohawk type steam locomotive and is an L3A class steam locomotive. This locomotive is one of 4 classes of Mohawks that were built for the New York Central by Alco and Lima between 1916 and 1943, and the classes were L1, L2, L3, and L4, and were the New York Central's preeminent, which because of its almost gradeless water level routes never needed the larger freight power of other railroads, and also it is one of 25 L3A class steam locomotives built by Alco in 1940 for dual service, numbered from 3000 to 3024. Also, the 482s from the New York Central Railroad are known as Mohawks. This locomotive spent its life working for the New York Central Railroad and was even used as a freight and passenger engine for the New York Central Railroad. Then later on, this locomotive was retired and was donated to the Texas State Fair Association in Fair Park in Dallas, Texas in 1957 and was displayed there and had replaced heavily vandalized Texas and Pacific 638, which is a 210-4 Texas type steam locomotive, and it was scrapped in 1955, and this one was displayed there and was reskinned as Texas and Pacific 909. Then in 1984, the Museum of the American Railroad traded this locomotive to the National New York Central Railroad Museum for Pennsylvania Railroad GG1 4903, and which is now in Frisco, Texas with the museum. And this one was acquired by the Lakeshore Historical Foundation in Northeast Pennsylvania, then later was towed to Elkhart, Indiana, and then arrived at the museum grounds. And in 2012, the smoke deflectors were mounted on, and also the locomotive is preserved at the museum and can be seen here on display at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. Also, New York Central 3001 is one of 2 surviving New York Central 482s left in the world today, and 2933 is the other one and is at the National Museum of Transportation in St. Louis, Missouri, and 3001 can even be found here at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. And also you can even visit the locomotive's cab and sit where the engineer and fireman used to sit as well. What you see right behind me is United Refrigerator Transit Company 38794. United Refrigerator Transit Company 38794 was built by General American Car Company in the 1940s and is a refrigerator car. This car was used for the United Refrigerator Transit Company, which was a St. Louis, Missouri, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin-based private refrigerator car line established in 1895 by the Joseph Schultz Brewing Company. Also, this car was used for hauling like produce, vegetables, and even dairy products as well, and other stuff this car may have hauled many years ago, and was used on freight trains and even used on a line of refrigerator cars identical to it many years ago, and even used on freight trains for the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad many years ago as well. Then later on, this refrigerator car was retired, and then it was acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. What you see right behind me is United Refrigerator Transit Company 38662. United Refrigerator Transit Company 38662 was built by General American Car Company in the 1940s and is a refrigerator car. This car was used for the United Refrigerator Transit Company, which was a St. Louis, Missouri and Milwaukee, Wisconsin-based private refrigerator car line established in 1895 by the Joseph Schultz Brewing Company. Also, this refrigerator car was used for hauling like produce, vegetables, and even dairy products as well, and other stuff that this car may have hauled many years ago, and was used on freight trains and even used on a line of refrigerator cars identical to it many years ago, and even used on freight trains for the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad many years ago as well. Then later on, this car was retired and was then acquired by the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana, where it is today. Well, I hope you all enjoyed learning about trains with me today in Matthew Lap Train Guy segment show. Also, I hope to see you all again in the next segment, and if you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, the subscribe button is just down below the video screen, and if you didn't give the Facebook page a like yet, here's where you'll want to go, and if you didn't give the Instagram page a follow it, here's where you want to go as well. Also, be sure to get your merch at teesprings.com. The link is in the description box below, along with the Facebook and Instagram pages. And remember to subscribe to the Train Guy. So this is Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy segment show. Sign out until next time. All aboard.